I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Salahuddin, Councilmember Nueva Camina, Councilmember Fields, Council Vice President Forsyth, and myself, Council President Kritzer. We will not be attended by Councilmember Stewart, and I will announce Councilmember Anderson if and when she arrives. There are 3 items on the agenda tonight: Redmond 2050 Planning Commission recommendation for the transportation element and regulations, tree health assessment and mitigation project update, and council talk time. The first item on the agenda is the Redmond 2050 Planning Commission recommendation for transportation element and regulations. Carol Helen, Director of Planning and Community Development, will introduce this item. Director Helen.
Thank you, Council President Kritzer, and good evening, members of the City Council. Last week, staff introduced the Planning Commission recommendation for updates to the transportation element appendices, and transportation-related regulations. At last week's meeting, you identified topics that you wanted to discuss further, and staff has documented those topics and questions in your packet and provided initial responses, which are available for you in Attachment A. Tonight, we anticipate devoting most of our time to a deeper dive into transportation impact fees. For that discussion, we're joined by Chris Breland and Marissa Milam from the city's transportation impact fee consultants, Farron Pierce. And also present tonight are Jeff Churchill and Josh Mueller from the Planning and Community Development Department, and Sarah Fee Allen and I will be providing answers to questions as might be necessary. So with that as an introduction, I'll turn the presentation over to Marissa.
Hello, thank you all for having me here today. I'll share my screen with the presentation and we can jump into talking about transportation impact fees. All right, is this clear on everyone's screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Great. All right, well, today's agenda, like Carol mentioned, is primarily to talk about transportation impact fees, as well as other transportation topics that were raised during the March 5th meeting. However, those items are time permitting. We wanted to get through as much impact fee related questions as we can tonight. And the objective of tonight's meeting is to obtain direction from Council for the transportation element, appendices, and related regulations for impact fees. So what are transportation impact fees? These are one-time charges that are paid by new development. They were authorized as a part of the 1990 GMA as a funding source for transportation improvements. Recent new changes to the GMA allow impact fees to fund dedicated active mode improvements. However, it's important to note that all of these projects that make up the impact fee program must add capacity to the transportation network. So next bullet related to this is that they can only be used to fund facilities that serve new growth rather than existing deficiencies. So for example, if there is an intersection in the system that has been very congested for years, it's been a kind of city priority to improve that intersection, and the mitigation proposed is a right turn pocket. While that project does add capacity to the system, it is not serving new growth. It is meant to mitigate the existing congestion, and so that would be an existing deficiency. So impact fees would not be able to be used on the project. Related to this, projects that are repaving a street or are maintenance related are also not eligible for impact fees. Currently, Redmond's existing impact fee program equates to about $6,130 per apartment unit. And this probably doesn't mean too much out of context, but we'll get into some later slides that show some more comparisons as to how this relates to kind of the proposed changes as well as other nearby jurisdictions. So getting into the proposed TFP funding sources, so the city prepared a transportation financial forecast for the comprehensive plan to fund the TFP. And as you can kind of see from the chart here, impact fees are the largest single source on the graph, making up about 30% of the overall funding source. And again, noting on this slide here that not all projects in the TFP are impact fee eligible. And some of those projects, again, have to be funded through the other revenue sources identified on this list, including transfers from the general fund, other jurisdictions, business taxes, developer contributions, and so on. So I know that council has seen this slide already, but wanted to just quickly highlight just what the goals of this impact fee update were. So primarily the goal was to simplify the rate structure and the analytical methods of the impact fee program, but also continue to include lower impact fees for land uses that generate higher shares of bike, pedestrian, and transit trips. And then there have been some more recent changes to GMA that exempt certain land uses from impact fees, like daycares and low-income housing. So including those updates into the program update to make sure that we're compliant with the GMA requirements. And then, of course, updating the overall project list to reflect the updated TMP. So I just quickly want to go over a very high level what sort of inputs go into the impact fee calculations. There's a lot of calculations to be compliant with the GMA, but for the sake of time, just wanted to go over these at a very high level, knowing that we can get into more technical details during the question and answer period if needed. So the main input here is the projects that are a part of the TFP list. So like we mentioned previously, not all projects from the TFP are eligible for impact fees. It is exclusively those projects that increase capacity and are not related to existing deficiencies. So once the TFP list has been filtered down to those capacity projects, those projects and their associated cost estimates become the impact fee eligible list. Then we do analysis with determining the land use growth and the associated growth in person trips that comes from the preferred alternative from the comprehensive plan, as well as additional calculations to ensure that we are compliant with the GMA and case law. And again, we can get into more details on this later on. So like I mentioned, the impact fee project list is just a subset of those TFP capacity projects. And the number for this update of eligible projects is 59. And while the total cost of those projects is almost 700 million, the assumed impact fee collection is close to about 240 million. So again, this is the same data that we kind of showed in that pie chart of showing how much revenue is expected from the impact fee program. That kind of 30% number of the total TFP cost comes out to this 240 million assumed of impact fee collection. And so the kind of important thing to note here is that this revenue forecast assumed a certain impact fee rate that's fairly similar to existing, but as a part of this program update, there are options that City Council has to charge a rate that is higher or lower than this. And so that's what we really want to kind of talk about today and present what those different options are and some of the trade-offs associated with that. Jumping around slides here. Okay, so impact fee options. This first yellow column here that you see is the rate for the revenue assumed in the TFP. So again, that 240 million number is about a rate of about 6,200. And like we mentioned on kind of that first slide, that's very similar to what the existing rate is, which is about 6,130 for an apartment unit. So this is, again, close to existing, but the rate that's assumed in the TFP. However, City Council can choose to set the rate at some other options here. So based off of the methodology that we worked through with city staff so far, the maximum that the city council could charge based off of the existing data and methodology is about 8,200, shown in green here. And if council wanted to collect or recoup as much money as possible, fund as much as possible from the TFP as a part of impact fees, based off of the overall project list eligibility, the maximum that could be charged could be up to 11,387. However, this number would require kind of additional supporting data and would generate about 450 million here. So just kind of looking at these numbers, City Council has the discretion to set the rate anywhere below the maximum allowable rate. So again, based off that current methodology, the maximum allowable would be about 8,200. But council does have that option to change the methodology a bit, add in some additional data sources, and increase that number even higher. So what we're wanting City Council to consider here on where you're setting the rate is a number of different items, which is considering affordability, kind of how much you want to build of the overall project list, how fast you're going to be building these projects, as well as the availability of other data sources, or sorry, other funding sources. If there are additional grants or something that can help fund the project list, maybe a lower impact fee rate is okay. So one other thing that we wanted to discuss as a part of this update to the program is some tweaks that we're making to the regional and urban centers adjustment. So right now, downtown and Overlake have a different rate than the rest of the city. That's a part of the existing impact fee code. And so the goal of this is to basically simplify that adjustment. Right now, there's a different rate for downtown than there is for Overlake, and this update would apply a single standard reduction to both of those sub areas, as well as including Marymore this time around. So we can get into more details on how this was calculated if necessary, but this is just kind of a simplification of the current code to account for these areas that are generating lower vehicle mode share. Okay, so we wanted to show a comparison here that was comparing the proposed impact fee rate that was assumed in a TFP, which was again shown in yellow on the previous slides, and how that actually equates for some common land uses that are seen in the city of Redmond. And then the other columns reflect the other options that were shown in the previous slides. So green is reflecting that 8,200 number based off of the existing data and methodology. And then blue is this maximum rate. So the current rate here, again, like we mentioned, is very similar to the rate that was assumed in the TFP. And so the cost to developers for each of these land uses is relatively similar. Any of these kind of more drastic changes that you're seeing in land uses between these two columns is really due to updates to the methodology to account for more recent data for trip generation and mode share in the city. And so we also wanted to show how this compares to other jurisdictions. So again, using that rate that was assumed in the TFP already, this is how the rate would compare to other jurisdictions nearby, like Bellevue, Kirkland, and Sammamish. You can see that it is relatively similar to the rates that these communities are currently charging. But one important thing to note is that Bellevue and Kirkland are both also updating their comprehensive plans right now and their impact fee programs, and these rates are likely to change and likely to increase. A lot of these communities are building out a very large project list and hoping to use impact fees as a main funding source there. All right, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions here, so I will turn it back to the council president.
Thank you so much. Is there any other presentation? I was a little bit uncertain given Director Helen's intro, or are we good to move to questions?
Josh, do you want to answer that?
We anticipated that there were going to be actually quite a lot of questions. So that's why we had the amount of time that we had set aside. So we could always go back to some of the slides if there needs to be some clarification, but really it's going to be the conversation about the policy approach the council would like to take.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Yes, and I see there are already some questions from the council. Councilmember Fields.
Thank you. Two questions, actually. Both are sort of criteria questions. The first one, with respect to where the money can use, the quality versus capacity issue. What about those situations, intersections that weren't necessarily deficient until growth happened or whatever? Intersections are, I'm just following up on your example. Isn't there sort of a blend or an intersection, no pun intended, between capacity and quality, and how is that determined? How do we make, is it a real clear distinction, or are there situations sometimes where that money can actually be used to improve an intersection because of growth?
Yeah, Chris Braylen, do you want to take that question?
Sorry, I'm on mute. You know that by now. Hi everybody, Chris Braylen. I'm principal here at Fair and Peers. That's a great question. The answer is that a intersection capacity projects are often quite in the sort of the bedrock of a lot of impact fee programs. The challenge of whether or not it's an existing deficiency has to do with whether or not the city has deemed the intersection to be not meeting a level of service standard under existing conditions. And that's a very technical definition that within the city of Redmond, in general, it's not something that's something that comes into play. The city defines the performance of the system such that most projects that are for an intersection improvement are going to be there for serving growth, because the city's generally kept pace with growth as defined within the TMP for how level of service is quantified. So I could get into more detail if you want, but I think in Redmond's situation, the majority of intersection type improvements would be impact fee eligible so long as they're adding space for any mode to accommodate new growth. As Marissa noted, if it's just to replace signal equipment or to repave the intersection, that is not adding any specific capacity and therefore cannot be used, or impact fees cannot be used for that.
Okay, and I think you went to sort of the purpose behind my question. If we're increasing capacity, say for something other than car mode of transportation, that the impact fee money can be used to add capacity for bicycle use or more pedestrian use or something like that. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, so that's that's made more explicit in the new updates to the GMA that specify that it doesn't even have to be in the specific right of way of the street to account for new capacity. So a lot of off-street paths are a part of this new impact fee project list, bike lanes, sidewalks, that sort of thing.
Great, thanks. And then the second question is somewhat similar, and that is this reduced impact fees for using or providing more non-vehicle use. In other words, more bikes, more whatever. So if and I'm going to give a really ridiculous example just to make the point. If I'm wanting to get that reduced fee, I might come up with the bare minimum, like maybe a painted bicycle or something. how is that criteria established that, where there's meaningful? And we've had this discussion in the past with planning department on levels of bike safety, protected lanes, et cetera, et cetera. So, how is that determination made that you actually do get a reduced fee or exemption because you're providing something of substance as opposed to just filling in a check mark?
Okay, sorry, let me recap your question. Are you asking specifically about the regional centers identified for reduction areas that overlake downtown and Marymore?
So those are done by areas.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are done by area for the regional reductions.
So it has nothing to do with what whoever's developing something provides. It's we've already classified those areas, or we've already designated those areas. Is that right?
Yeah, Chris, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. So if somebody chooses the reduced impact fees has to do with the amount of trips they make and by what mode. So it has nothing to do with facilities that they may provide as part of frontage improvements or on-site necessarily, since those are often required by code. It has everything to do with where they are generally located, areas that are nearer to transit facilities, for example, or in downtown, demonstrably have more people walking or taking transit and fewer people driving. The cost to build those facilities is less than building new auto facilities. So that's what it's all about. The slight wrinkle to that, if somebody does some very exceptional travel demand or traffic demand management strategies, they could have to do a special study. So this is not part of the normal course of getting a permit, to demonstrate to the city's satisfaction that they're generating trips at an even lower rate. The code and law allows for that, but that's not typical.
Got it. And I thought that I had heard that, so thanks for the clarification. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to recognize that Councilmember Anderson has joined us as well. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Thank you. And Councilmember Fields asked my first question, but I have two additional questions that I'll just ask in rapid fire. But the first one was around the maximum possible rate, and the additional data, supporting data that would lead us to that. Could you share, what additional data, if it's easily shareable, or after the fact, what data that might be, or what we might need to collect for that? And then the second question that I had is, you mentioned that Bellevue, Kirkland, Sammamish are currently working on their plans as well. Do we have any estimates or presentations that you've spoken to with them on what their proposed rates might be that they're bringing toward their councils, and would we be able to see what their potential moving forward is? Sorry, two different questions.
I'll be happy to answer the one on the additional data for the maximum rate allowable. So currently the rate is set up based on our existing deficiencies with our pavement condition index. Additional data that could be included could be existing deficiencies within those non-motorized, our pedestrian, or our bicycle networks. Currently, our Public Works group is doing sidewalk condition data collection, and then I know there's additional pilot projects for continued PCI data collection coming later this year.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you, staff, for going through and putting together the presentation to help us further along the conversation. My question, and I'm not sure if I'm quite sure that I probably didn't ask it as clearly as I could have in our when we were putting our list of questions together, and that was still around how do we factor in inclusionary housing when we've got childhood learning centers are exempt, and also low income housing, which includes up to 80% AMI. However, if that building is not a segregated, completely low income, then and they're participating in Arch, then is it the number of units, or how is that cost assigned, the fee assigned?
I'll take this one if that's all right. Jeff Churchill, good evening, council members. So any unit that's eligible for an exemption, whether it be through inclusionary zoning or through the MFTE program, or through or if it has public subsidy, anything that meets the definition up to 80% AMI would be eligible. So people, developers who are proposing developments that include inclusionary units would be eligible for an exemption for those units. So that's how that would work. Does that answer your question? That question?
So then, if, say, for example, just so that I've got it completely clear, so that if the development has 100 units and 10% participation within a program, then 90 of those units would have the fee assessed, correct?
That's right. And then I think we missed an answer to one of Councilmember Salahuddin's questions before about Bellevue, Kirkland, and Sammamish. I wonder if we can return to that and I can kick it to Marissa.
Yeah, so just to quickly answer that question, we don't have any like recent data to share from Bellevue, Kirkland, or Sammamish. Their council is going to go through this exact same process of identifying, what those updates could look like, what the maximum allowable rate is, and then determine where they want to set it as well. So hopefully more information in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Other questions from the council?
I have one more
I'm
question.
seeing. Yeah, great. Councilmember Fields.
Thanks. So we towards the end of your presentation, you were talking about rates and how many and the quantity of projects as part of our consideration. And you may not be able to give me this answer tonight, but I think an important part of my decision making would be, where do we think we're at with our current infrastructure and current growth and the expected growth, and Redmond, from everything I can gather, is on a per capita basis is outpacing most of our neighboring cities as far as growth. We're growing more people and more housing than on a rate basis than other locations. So that potentially means we have more need for meeting that capacity. So is there a way to sort of get a sense of where we think we're at, a qualifying question or a qualifying set of information? Hey, we're doing great. We're feel like we're behind, something along those lines.
I'll start off and then others can join in. That's a really interesting question, Councilmember Fields. The way that Redmond measures what you're asking is infrastructure keeping pace with growth. That's how we measure it in our transportation master plan. And that's the policy decision the council has made as far as how to measure it. And if you look at Redmond's concurrency program, what you'll see is that growth is concurrent, that the infrastructure is concurrent with growth. And that means that infrastructure is keeping pace with growth and we're concurrent, and that means we're doing okay. That's a technical answer. I think this is the time, right, that the council's direction on level of service is really important, because we're establishing a new transportation plan to take us out to 2050 to support thousands of more residents and people working in Redmond through the year 2050. what you have before you is a transportation element with a transportation facilities plan that says these are the projects that we would commit to fund to support that growth. And an analysis in the environmental impact statement that shares kind of what that would look like. And it would look like, in short, no, there will be more congestion in the future because there will be more people and more cars. But I think what we have, I think a conclusion we've reached in the past, and this would be another good opportunity to affirm it, is that we can't build our way out of that. And so you don't see a whole lot of intersection improvements and general capacity improvements because that's not going to solve our problem. Our problem is going to be solved by having more options for people to get around. And so you'll see that kind of focus in the transportation facilities plan, which I guess is a way of kind of is turning the question back to the council, because this is the time that council gets to establish what that level of service is going to be, what's going to get funded to support that growth.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Mr. Churchill, that is my favorite answer so far in 2024, because I think you're exactly right. And I just wanted to sort of frame that decision making that the council needs to address. So thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. I think I just want to follow on and for Councilmember Fields, because I think we're on the cusp of hitting on something critical here, which is we keep talking about how we want our bike ped infrastructure to be more protected and safer, and we want our ADA plans and our inclusivity to be very high, and we kind of want to go above and beyond of what just we do status quo. So I think this is our opportunity to make sure that we can fund all of those things that we've been talking about, and make sure that that vision that we've been setting really gets followed through. So I'm excited to fund this and to make this choice so that we are building the future that we all on this council really truly want to see, which is more inclusive, safer, and greater access.
Thank you. And I will jump to my questions while others think if they have any others as well, seeing no other ones, another hands up. So I'm curious to know, as you did some of the analysis on the three different options, kind of continuing status quo or increased or the higher increase, what you think about in terms of the potential impact on future development. Whenever we're making these types of changes, it can impact, the amount of growth that we actually get, or kind of the how those who might be doing projects will pencil those out. Any other factors, how you think about it holistically amongst also some of the other types of changes that we're looking at as part of Redmond 2050, and some of those updates as well.
So I'll start, I guess. That's exactly right. That is definitely a way that we're looking at this as we analyze rate options, is what's affordable, as Marissa was showing on a slide earlier. And it's a similar conversation as the council has been having about, for example, inclusionary zoning. You turn the dial one way or the other, you're changing how much a project is going to cost. So that's definitely something to look at. And then you have to balance that with what are the investments that we need to make in the community to support the growth that is coming in the future. And so, and council has a lot of discretion under the law about that policy choice. As Marissa set out really nicely, kind of anything from 0 to the blue bar to the green bar is kind of where we can go right now, and anything up to the the blue bar, with the additional data that Josh was talking about. I think Chris might have something more to say as well.
Yeah, just briefly to add on, it's a good question, and one we develop a lot of impact fee programs around the country, in the state, and that's often a question that emerges. And I'll say that in reading the sort of academic and economist literature on this, it is not exactly, you might think it's a black and white answer, that impact fees make it more expensive to develop and dissuade development. That's not true in a cut and dry sense. Impact fees are not often a huge part of a pro forma for a project, and they also indicate the willingness for a community to invest in public infrastructure, which has a net positive value on the land. And it's often the land value that sort of drives a lot of decision making. It's not exactly clear, but the evidence is substantiated that for marginal projects that are right at the edge of penciling out, an impact fee increase can sort of tip the scales in one direction or another. But for a lot of the development that's occurring in Redmond, the demand to develop is quite high. And I don't know that this is going to have a strong influence, particularly when you look at almost all the surrounding jurisdictions have fairly high impact fees. And as Marissa noted, those ones in neighboring jurisdictions that are a bit lower now are likely to increase. We didn't show some other folks on the map. A lot of the far east King County cities, North Bend, Duval, Carnation, because they've been so behind in building out the infrastructure, they have had no choice but to put in very high impact fees. And to this point, people are still building homes and businesses there because there's a fundamental lack of land in King County and Puget Sound in general. So I think it's a good opportunity to raise revenue at this point, but it's not. I don't diminish the fact that for some businesses, it's going to make some folks on the margin question some investment decisions.
Thank you. And I see Director Helens raised her hand as well.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to add on to what Chris said with respect to the impact fees. And the impact fees, as we're recommending them right now, actually waive impact fees for the affordable housing and for daycare, which actually has not been something we have done in the past. So that will waive impact fees for those direct assistance projects like Together Center in a much larger way to help make those more affordable. It will also waive impact fees for anyone who's the units that are being produced for as part of the inclusionary housing requirement, or if people avail themselves of a kind of a recalibrated 12-year MFTE to 12 to 24-year MFTE. It would also waive the impact fees associated with the affordable units that were associated with those projects, provided they're at 80% or below.
That's great. And I really appreciate all the answers to that question. I think just looking at this and with the questions that we've been getting in the other parts of Redmond 2050, seeing this is such a key part of that conversation is really important for us to be able to communicate out. And again, as I've said in the past, really excited for us to finally be doing the childcare facilities exemption piece of that as well. So thank you very much for the work on that. So one question in terms of the couple of potential options. So we have the recommended one in front of us with the TFP. Can you clarify what would be the potential next steps in terms of whether we would choose one of the other options, what that timeline would look like, and how that might affect how you would formulate the TFP?
Josh and I were talking about that a little bit earlier today. We are conducting prioritization work for the rest of the build-out list, so what's not recommended in the TFP right now. So if the council gave us direction to look at a higher rate, we would want to complete that work, which we expect to happen in the summertime, and then be able to bring you back, all right, well, here will be then, if you raised more revenue, here are the kinds of things that you could consider funding or adding to the TFP. They would need to be TFP eligible or impact fee eligible projects, obviously, based on that prioritization work. So that'll be later this year. And I know that your study session schedules are very busy, but we would just figure out when to bring that back to you for that discussion. If the council gave us direction to look at a rate that was higher than could be supported with the data that we have, that is work that would need to extend into 2025 so that we could collect the data, so that it would be a defensible rate. So that's something we want to know relatively soon, is if council supports a higher rate, kind of how much higher, up to the green or beyond, up into the blue. But those are the timelines that Josh and I were talking about earlier today.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Are there other questions from the council?
I didn't raise my hand, but just a really quick follow-up to the answer
Yeah.
that.
Feel free to use the hand raise button. I can call on you in the future.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I didn't want you
Councilmember
to get
Fields.
away from me. And the question just came up 1 second ago. So in that direction that council would give you, it could potentially be a blend of raising the rate and reducing the exemptions that you propose, because to get to an estimated dollar revenue dollars, correct? I mean,
yeah, I think that's correct.
Director Helen, any thoughts on that?
Yes, that would be correct. The other thing I just wanted to note is that the city actually, the way the recommendation is calibrated right now is that the state does allow us not to replace funding for the uses that we've recommended for exemption. So we don't have to come up with those funds separately. We are allowed to exempt those uses without the city having to replace that funding stream.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
I guess I would ask the question, is there anyone who is proposing that we don't include any exemptions that the staff and planning commission have recommended? Because it would be helpful for the rest of us to know if that's on the table. Okay, that's helpful. Councilmember Nueva Camina?
Just making sure that it's spoken on the record that no, I don't have any opposition to that.
Thank you. Great. Well, it sounds like this one pending question here is whether the council would be interested in looking at some of the higher rate options. And so I'll put it out there if council members want to speak to that tonight. I know we also have a study session scheduled for 2 weeks from now to follow up on this topic. So it may be there's some food for thought or questions that council members may want answered. I know one question I would love to get a little bit more information on, which I think one of the other council members asked, but would love in writing so I can kind of understand it, is what additional types of data we would be looking at for option C. I know that's a whole analysis you have ahead, but just to generally get the scope of how different that would be helpful for me to make that decision. But yeah, put it out there. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, just on that additional data, also how long would that take to collect, and what steps would be needed to make sure that we get to that data point of the proposed potential rate that you shared.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Yeah, I'm also interested in the crosswalk of us increasing and then capacity to actually complete the projects in a timely manner, so we're not collecting funds without, having the projects lined up as well.
Yeah, any other questions that council members would want to have answered before perhaps we'll kind of come back at the next meeting with the understanding that council members can provide some more direction on where of the different options you'd like us to head. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And I apologize for being late. Thanks, folks, for the patience. I think the idea that Mr. Fields had regarding sort of toggling the increase in fees and the reduction in fees would be interesting to look at in terms of a model for what kinds of options, maybe 2 or 3, what would that look like for future revenue? Thank you.
Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, I was going to mention that a few minutes ago when you asked the question. It felt like you asked the question in a way that I had not intended, which is I'm certainly not proposing we don't have any exemptions for the things that we're trying to encourage: affordable housing, daycare. But Councilmember Anderson sort of nailed the point I was trying to make: is toggling is helpful. Not to get rid of them, but maybe adjust them so that we make sure that we capture fairness, which is what I can't remember. One of the staff mentioned earlier. We don't want to raise them to the point where businesses, the proverbial doesn't pencil out thing. So we want to be careful, and having more information and more data and more options without driving staff crazy, I think is really important in a very important decision.
Understood. And apologies if the way I asked the question wasn't clear. I just was curious if there were particular aspects of the recommendations that staff could bring any clarifications back on. So I just wanted to get under that that question. Director Helen.
Yes, I just wanted to note that the work that Farron Pierce has helped us with at this point in time is work that was funded as part of the comprehensive plan update. If we were to undertake the additional analysis that was necessary to support a higher fee, I would propose that we do that as part of the budget process and come back with a one-time request for funds that we would probably undertake that work after we're done with the comp plan update. So the consequence of making a decision now that would be really, our recommendation would be don't go anywhere above the middle option, and together with the list of projects. And to the extent that the council wants us to explore a broader list, that we would do that next year. And it would be really a phased option. We'd have one impact fee go into effect in 2025. And then after doing some additional analysis, bring back that analysis to the city council for a potential future impact fee to go into effect with a broader list, with information also about delivery on the public work side.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
I appreciate that response from Director Holland. The question I have about this, it's just sort of a curiosity at this point. I understand it's clear that the staff recommends the middle option. Are there significant economic pressures that are keeping us at that level that would prevent us from some of these more flexible options? And that's just an open question, I suppose. But I like the idea that we can come back to this next year and think about if there's ways that we can raise rates for certain things and then lower them so that it advances some of the affordable housing work that we're doing. I think that's what I hear from council is that's a huge concern. And I think that is a mechanism that we may have as policymakers to advance some of those goals in a without adding a lot of complexity, but also being able to change the rates every year is something we need to recognize as a tool that's available to us. I like the idea of including that in the budget process as if that's an option in the future. But I think my main question is, why wouldn't we pursue the higher rate? And specifically, are there economic pressures in the city now that we're seeing that would prevent us from pursuing those at this point?
Well,
it seems like a revenue opportunity.
Yeah. Well, it is supposed to offset growth. So it's not an unbridled revenue opportunity. It is a constrained revenue opportunity. It has to be something, project that is on the TMP and is also impact fee eligible. So with that in mind, it really is calibrating the list to align with your priorities, which is what we believe we've done, and then collecting the revenue that we believe is defensible with the information that we have, and that reflects that middle option too. And then if we were to want to increase the amount of revenue we recover, we would have to go above and beyond with the data, with our data needs. And maybe Jeff has an add-on with that.
Maybe I can ask. I just wanted to pick on one of the words that you used was defensible. So is the highest option somehow not, or is it just more challenging for us to do that at this point? And maybe Jeff, you can handle that one.
I will. But before I do that,
Yeah.
remind me if I don't get back to it. But just to go back, so what staff is actually recommending is that council not go any higher than the middle bar, but what's in the existing TFP is actually the yellow bar, which is the one on the left. And to get to the middle bar, we don't need to do more analysis on existing deficiencies. We do need to finish the prioritization work of the unfunded projects so that we can, and that is something that could be finished in 2024. So anything up to that middle bar, but just to be clear, that's not what's actually in the TFP. The TFP is based on the yellow bar, which is on the left, which I realized a long time ago now, so you might have forgotten what order they were in. Okay, and then on the question now you have to remind me, Councilmember Anderson, what was that question that you asked?
So the proposal is staff set on the middle option, but I'm looking for a why not the higher option, and it sounded like it's harder or more challenging in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to support an option that goes beyond the middle bar, we need to know more about the existing deficiencies in our transportation system, and that relies on data that we do not have. And so we can't, so it's not defensible to set the rate at that level yet because we haven't collected the data to support it. That's all.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Fields?
Yeah, along the same line and something that Director Helen said about raising the rates later, this is not just a rate issue, this is a quantity issue. So trying to keep pace, or trying to match, I should say, the impacts of growth depends on how busy we are and how much is done. So it's not like we can raise our rates. It's not like an operational decision. These are points in times assessments or revenue. So saying we're going to raise the rates later and then having that level of development much less than what it be in the next year or two, then we don't capture the goals and the values we want. And I get it. That's sort of a somewhat of a complex thing to capture. But I didn't want council members to lose track of that or lose sight of that.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I do have one other question that I meant to ask earlier as part of just this whole picture of what we're considering. You mentioned the change in policy for the centers and that there would be a 24% reduction. Is that relative to today?
So the 24% reduction is based off of the rate relative to the rest of the city. I would need to look specifically at the numbers of what the reduction is today. I want to say it's about 18% for downtown. Is that right, Josh?
Yeah, it's pretty close. It varies, especially we have some those properties in Marymore and in downtown and Overlake that are adjacent to the light rail stations. But yeah, and Marymore right now, I guess is so it's probably somewhere around that 18 to 19, somewhere around there.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think you gave us a lot of food for thought, and I know there were quite a few other questions on the other pieces that were included within this packet, and we do have another study session scheduled for 2 weeks from now. So unless council members have other questions while we have the consultants here on the impact fees, I think we can close out for tonight and plan to move to continue to study this in 2 weeks, and we'll ask council members to think over some of the options so that way we hopefully can give staff some more direction in 2 weeks. Does that work? Does that work for you, Director Helen, in terms of the timeline there? Was there anything else that would be helpful for us to share tonight from your side?
No, that would be perfect.
Great.
If you do have questions other than the ones that were included in the packet materials or any responses that you would like, it would be really useful if we could get those. We have a packet due date by the Wednesday before your packet is actually the Wednesday before your council meeting. So if you could get any of those questions to us by the beginning of next week, that would be great.
Great. Thank you so much for that reminder. And I will note that I think there were some good answers to questions in the packet, some of which related to this, but some of which related more to the transportation element and other pieces of that. And I know, at least from my perspective, there are a couple things that I think would be great for us to be able to talk about in open session as well. So hopefully we can cover those in the next study session. And if I don't see any other hands up, then we will close out this item and move on to the next one. And thank you so much to our guest presenters as well for coming and for doing this great analysis for our city, as well as to our city staff that have worked very hard on this, as well, and our planning commission for their work on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The next item on the agenda is the Tree Health Assessment and Mitigation Project Update. Laureen Hamilton, Parks and Recreation Director, will introduce this item. Director Hamilton?
Yes. Good evening, Council. Can everyone hear me okay? This item this evening is the Tree Health and Mitigation Report. Back in 2021 and 2022, a joint effort between Planning and Public Works and Parks was undertaken to assess vegetation management throughout the city. Through that process, there were areas of urban forestry and vegetation that we found were not being managed by either team. And so in the last budget process, funding was requested to conduct a comprehensive assessment of those areas with recommendations for mitigation. Those efforts were led by our wonderful Parks Deputy Director, Dave Tuchek, as well as a cross-departmental team. And so he's going to present this item this evening, as well as share next steps, findings, and take any questions that you all may have on this item. So I'm going to hand it over to our Parks Deputy Director, Dave Tuchek.
Great. Thank you, Director Hamilton. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Great. Again, Dave Tuchek, Deputy Director, and I'm going to be sharing this report and then answering questions afterwards. So really the purpose is to go over the report and then cover these agenda topics. So we're going to be going over the project overview, followed by the properties that were inspected, the trees that were inspected, the methods that we used to conduct the inspections, followed by the results, and then next steps. So before I talk about these two bullets on the screen, I just want to say that this is the first comprehensive tree health risk assessment that the city has performed on this scale. So we do regularly inspect individual trees or maybe some small groups of trees, but never at this magnitude. So about 2 years ago, the city staff determined that this was a very important project that needed to be done. So we received funding during the last budget process to perform this work. And in August this past year, we hired Bartlett Consulting to perform a health and risk assessment of the city-owned trees. And really the purpose of this project is to identify the hazardous trees in the community and then also to reduce the safety risk. So the properties that we inspected all 47 parks. We inspected all green belts in the city, including native growth protection areas and then also native growth protection easements, trail corridors, all of our main arterial roadways, our 7 fire stations, utility properties, including stormwater retention ponds, wellheads, lift stations, other utility properties, and then other municipal properties, including the municipal campus, community centers, and beautification areas. So the trees that were inspected, they had some criteria that they needed to meet. The first criteria is that they had to have a certain size of diameter of trunk. So they had to be 12 inches or larger. And basically those size of trees pose the greatest risk in terms of, damage if they fail. The other criteria is they had to be within a target. So a target is described as either a house, a busy road, building, parking lot, any area that had high use or value. So the tree had to be within at least 1.5 times the tree height of the target. So that was our first criteria. And then the inspection type, we had 3 different levels of inspection that the consultants performed. So the level 1 inspection basically is called a visual inspection. So they went out to our city properties, took a look at the trees, inspected trees that were 12 inches or larger in diameter that had a target within 1.5 times the tree height. And it equated to about 18,500 trees that they inspected with a level 1 inspection. During the level 1 inspection, if they saw a tree that they had concerns about in terms of its safety or its general health, then they performed a level 2 inspection. So the level 2 inspection, they have a form that they use, and they take a look at things like the general health of the tree. They look at the roots, surface roots, the tree trunks, the canopy. They're looking for structural defects, large limbs that are hanging over a target, disease, insect activity, all of those types of things. And then they basically performed a level 2 inspection on 285 trees. Some of the trees needed more inspection that the level 2 visual could provide. So they did some additional testing. So with the level tree, and that was performed on 16 of the 285 trees, they used things like an aerial inspection. So there would be a tree with, it looked like some kind of a defect high up in the tree. So they had to climb the tree and inspect it. They also did some core drilling. So they use basically a wood drill that is safe for the tree trunk, and then they'll drill into the tree trunk and then check the density of the trunk, density of the wood, and the health of the wood. And then they also use a piece of equipment, sometimes it's called acoustic tomography. So basically they use an electronic instrument to measure the density of the wood in the tree trunk. So following the analysis of all of these trees, these are the top defects that they found. So 77 trees that were completely dead, 37 trees that had significant decay. 25 of the trees had codominant stems, meaning that you have a main tree trunk, and then as you go up the tree, you'll have multiple leaders. And so the multiple leaders can have weak attachments to the main trunk, so they can present some serious safety issues. They also found 20 trees with significant cavities, which are just basically holes in the trunk with a lot of decay. And then they also found 12 trees that had extended large branches that create their own problems. So then they did find 211 trees. They identified 211 trees out of the 285 that they did a level, that they did the level 2 on, that they created this kind of information. So I'm sharing this tree assessment table. I'm not going to go through all the information, but I just wanted to share some of the information that they gathered on all of these trees. So kind of starting from left to right where the pointer is, you can see a number. So each tree was numbered. It's been mapped on a GIS map located within 3 feet. And then also there's a metal tag attached to each tree with a number so that we can find the tree later. It's got the common name, the genus and species of the trees, the diameter, height, drip line, the condition of the tree, the part of concern. So if you look at tree number 1, they have concern with the branch. The defect is that it is overextended. It has a probable failure likelihood. The target is a residence and the risk is high. So they recommend pruning for the mitigation. So then just to kind of an overall listing of summary of the recommended actions. They identified 70 trees that need to be pruned. We have 69 trees that have to be fully removed. They identified 71 trees to convert to wildlife snag. So basically what that is they will take the canopy off the tree and then bring it down to a certain height along the trunk. So it can be anywhere from like 10 feet to 40 feet tall. And wildlife snags are really important for nesting for wildlife, also food. A lot of these snags have a lot of insects that the birds like, and then also perching areas for birds and nesting. And then there was one tree that they actually recommend moving the target, and the target is a swing set up at Meadow Park. So they say that we should either move the swing set or we'll have to do some other mitigation on the tree. So then next steps with this process, we're going to have our own certified arborists, probably 2 to 3 of our certified arborists in-house go out and do a field inspection of all of these 211 hazardous trees, just to truth check what the consultants identified and prepare us for basically hiring a contractor to do the mitigation work on these trees. Following our certified arborists inspecting these trees, we're going to prioritize the trees for mitigation. At this time, I do not believe that we're going to have all of the funding required to do all the mitigation work. So we're going to go out and basically focus on the highest priority, the highest risk trees first. And then after that, after we secure additional funding, if needed, then we'll do the lower priority trees. Another big part of this project is our communications plan. So we've already been doing communication to the community. We will be including a dedicated web page for this project. We will do direct communications with individuals that are impacted. So if we're going to be doing some tree work behind somebody's backyard, behind their fence, we're going to probably contact the property owners and let them know what we're doing with the tree behind their fence. We will also be having Q alert category for related issues, so that when we get questions coming in from the public, that'll go directly to us. Following that, we're going to be hiring a contractor to perform the mitigation work, and that contract will be coming before council once we've selected a contractor to approve. And then lastly, we're going to be performing tree replacements where appropriate. So there's going to be some tree locations that is not conducive for replanting. So either the place is either going to have a lot of trees already, or it's going to be in a place where the tree shouldn't have been growing in the first place. So, but there's going to be a lot of places where we'll be able to come back and actually do some tree replacements and tree planting. And that concludes the presentation, and I open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duchek. Are there other questions from the council? Councilmember Nueva Camina.
You, Dave. Good to see you.
Yes.
Good to see you, Director Hamilton. My question is about, well, one, I love that we're already thinking about our communication plan so that we can be in communication with our residents about what's happening, whether it's impacting their backyards or they're driving by and they're like concerned about what's happening with our trees and our tree canopy. My question was about, because you had mentioned that it hadn't been done before, and wondering what was the catalyst, and what was the catalyst and or reasoning behind doing that, deciding to go forward with it. And then two, now that we've done it, what is the time frame that we are thinking about that we would want to do it again?
Great questions. Yeah, so really the catalyst, Director Hamilton basically mentioned it kind of at the beginning, and I'll elaborate a bit, but we had a subcommittee, cross-departmental subcommittee, taking a look at all of our vegetation management practices, and then we were identifying gaps that we were missing, and this rose to the top. It was a gap, and like I said, some of our properties in the city, we do a pretty good job with regular tree inspections, our parks in particular, because we have so many staff members who either are arborists or they've been doing a lot of arboriculture work, so they can pretty immediately spot if a tree has a problem. There's some properties in the city that just, quite frankly, don't get visited a lot or are hidden from the roadway, so we didn't even really see. And so this project allowed us the opportunity to really inspect the entire perimeter of a lot of these properties that we really hadn't inspected before. The other part of your question was the time frame, and we really should be doing this. The consulting arborists recommend every 5 years. One of the good things with doing that is the next time we do this, we're not going to find 211 trees that need work. It's going to be substantially less. Their experience is the number keeps going down and down. The other really great thing, and it's the main purpose of this project, is reducing risk in the community, because trees, they occasionally drop limbs, or in windstorms they fall, and so if we can reduce that risk, that's really what this is all about.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thanks. I'm really interested in this topic. A couple of questions that are on my mind right now are the replacement strategy. And you said we don't have the funding to get all of these trees that need to come down, but do we have the funding in line for replacing? And as far as replacing goes, are we looking at lower allergy trees? I noticed a lot of these trees are high allergy trees, and drought resistant trees. Are any of the impacts from this from climate change, and how we're planning for that? So I know that's a lot of questions all in one. If you could take your best stab, that'd be great.
You bet. So
can I jump on one of them, Dave? Can I mention?
You bet.
Can I jump on the funding piece real fast?
Exactly.
For the replacement strategy, I'll let Dave talk more to the types of trees and things like that. That actually is also kind of dovetailing into the work that we did on the climate resiliency and sustainability, which we're going to be talking with you all on the 26th about. So I'll let Dave touch that piece a little more. From the funding piece, we actually have a number of different ways and funds within kind of the city that exists that we can look to for tree replacement. We have some different tree canopy funds. We have some mitigation funds that do exist. And then we will also be assessing what our ability to utilize existing funds are to help replace these trees, and what any need for additional budget might be. And those will be conversations that we'll be having throughout the budget process, particularly around the mitigation budget. But it is our goal to replace as many of these trees as we are able, because the goal, of course, is to be increasing our tree canopy towards our tree canopy goals. And so we do have some resources at hand to be able to address some of that. And then any additional needs we would be bringing through our normal budgeting processes.
Okay, that's great to hear since I know, we expect the community to replace the trees when they get pulled down. So I would expect we would do the same.
Yes, and then there are certain times where, particularly when trees are hazardous and of great risk to the community, the replacement requirements within code are actually not as stringent. That being said, so I just want to note that. And that being said, our goal is to replace as many of these trees as we can. And even if we're not necessarily able to replace them in the place that we're doing them, to wrap that into our Green Redmond work and our planting efforts. And again, that also will dovetail into some of the work that we're going to be speaking to on the 26th about, where we've actually done some mapping of areas throughout our system, our park system, and just the city on the whole, where we'll be able to do tree canopy expansion. So this isn't kind of a let's pull the trees out and just leave it. It's actually part of a bigger picture that we're working on as well.
Thank you.
And Dave, I'll let you talk to the type of trees.
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to say, and, one of the slides represented it. So I would say, it was like, 77 trees or something. They're completely dead, right? So they're really not, they're contributing to the habitat, but it would be good to get a growing tree in that place, or like Director Hamilton said, somewhere else in our city system where it's a great place for the tree to grow, so it's got room and it's not competing with other trees. And then what was really good is we did come under budget on this particular consulting firm in terms of who did the assessment, which freed up resources for this mitigation work, but then also replacement trees too. So that's definitely a positive. And when I was talking about funding the mitigation work, we're really not going to know until we go out and do the bid, get the bids in where we're going to land. And then, like Director Hamilton said, in a couple of weeks, I'll be back and sharing with you our climate resiliency and sustainability and vegetation management plan. And there's definitely a major component of that for tree canopy expansion and some of the GIS mapping, cross-departmental work that we did. So
I am interested to know if any of these trees were impacted by the signs we're seeing already from climate change, if that's data we have or not.
That is not data we gathered, I don't believe.
Yeah, it's really tough to specifically show, but that being said, I know the climate change and we've all been experiencing the increase in temperatures of climate. So it does have an impact, particularly with some of the native species that were already maybe on the edge, like the western red cedar. One really great thing with the information I'm going to share in a couple weeks with the plan, you'll get a copy of it prior to the meeting, is there's pages and pages of lists of climate resilient tree species and shrub species and ground cover in there. And that was one of the tasks for the consultant to perform when they put that together.
Awesome. Thank you. I look forward to that.
Yeah, I think we all will look forward to that. Thank you. Councilmember Fields.
Thank you. So a little bit follow up to Councilmember Forsyth. And I appreciate all of this. I think we have had a lot of discussions on the benefits and the importance for us, for our future generations, of a healthy tree canopy, and some of the information that you gather here, I would guess, would give you indications of other problems emerging, and you're not just solving a problem, you're actually evaluating why the problem is there. And when I think about the last 4 or 5 minutes of discussion, I have a memory, and I am the oldest member on council, so my memory is not near as good as my younger colleagues, but we did do a tree canopy strategic plan like in 2019 or 2020 or somewhere. Is this part of that? And if so, wouldn't that strategic plan, as many of our city strategic plans, sort of be updatable, and especially around the funding needs? Are we looking at that work?
Yeah, so so with our climate resiliency work that we did and the plan that we developed with our consultant, and once you receive it, you'll see, but they did this great plan review of all the existing plans that we have in the city, including our tree canopy strategic plan. They looked at ESAP, they looked at pretty much all of them, and really the goal was to define actionable items and really focus on what we felt would be the most impactful at the time. So we've all been operating with those plans and implementing some of it, but this was an opportunity to directly focus on certain areas. And so you'll see when I present it in 2 weeks, and when you get the plan, it's very targeted on specific actions. One of the things is the focus is to bring the information and what other different teams within the city are doing. So natural resources, for an example, is doing some great work with naturalization and tree canopy expansion, parks with our Green Redmond partnership. But we weren't working directly together, and we hadn't, even though we had lists of areas that we wanted to plant trees, we didn't have them specifically mapped and prioritized. And so that's what this project is going to be about, that we're going to be sharing, is now these areas are actually mapped on GIS, and then we're going to field inspect these areas, finish prioritizing them, and then we'll start planting. We're already planting, but this will give us more direction where to plant. Hopefully that answered some of your question.
It did, and just acknowledgement of the strategic plan and how we are continuing to use, all of that thinking that has gone on over the years. I appreciate that, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And my understanding is that we still are below our metric on that plan, which is to actually increase our amount of tree canopy over time, I think to 40%. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And so we're, fluctuating depending on the data set between 37 and 38%. So, we've got a ways to go, but we've got, ideas and plans to make it happen.
Great. Yeah. Looking forward to more discussion on that. Councilmember Anderson.
I just wanted to say thank you to and appreciate Councilmember Forsyth for mentioning allergies. I think that's important because we have been working on this new focus of community health and public health in general. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, I will jump in with my question. And I would say, I think, echo some of the pieces that have come up already. One question that occurred to me as I was looking at the maps, in particular around how we do communication or how we do prioritization, is that there do seem like particular areas where we have some clustering of a bunch of work that would go on, where there are a bunch of high priority efforts, especially ones that are closer to our downtown core, or that are in areas that are highly visible. I guess I would just be curious how you're thinking about staggering the work on those, or whether you do it all at once, and if so, if we are going to do it in certain areas of a larger amount of changes, just circling back on that question around communications.
Correct. So, kind of twofold. In terms of the mitigation work, there's definitely clusters of trees and areas where we're going to have to be doing quite a bit of pruning, and some removals also, particularly along a lot of the main arterials. That's just how it came about and how the trees ended up. Like I said, the parks generally were in really good shape, but the main arterials, we identified some work to do. In terms of tree canopy expansion, I think that we're really going to focus long-term in the areas where one of the focus is going to be where there is minimal tree canopy, and that's in the downtown core. And it is a challenge because we do have a lot of infrastructure, a lot of buildings, a lot of trees. We do have some street trees. We do have some places where we can increase tree canopy, but it's just more of a challenge in the downtown core than it is in other parts of the city. So kind of twofold answer to that question.
And if I can jump in on the communication piece, how that piece will play out is that as Dave's team really takes this report in and begins that prioritization, we have a couple of staff within our team. And then, of course, we have the city communications team. And we'll really sit down and wrap our arms around what those communication phases need to look like, because like you said, if we're really going to be addressing a significant area in downtown, we're going to need to do really significant communications around that. We'll need to be going down and talking to businesses. We'll need to be using our city channels, our parks channels, and doing everything we can to kind of get the word out about the work that we're doing, because we do find that when we remove trees that are significant trees in highly trafficked areas, they catch a lot of attention. So doing as much as we can on the front end to kind of educate people as to the whole reason why we did this plan. So we will definitely be working really closely with Dave's team and the city communications team, as well as our internal parks folks who help head up our social media channels, to make sure that we are doing as much community education and then dovetailing that into the community education around the work that we're going to start doing on the tree canopy in the climate resiliency plan that we're going to be bringing to in a couple weeks. So we don't have that full communications plan in detail yet. In fact, we just got the final draft of this plan, I think like the day before I sent it to council. So we're still kind of getting into that implementation phase, but we'll be happy as we are embarking on this to make sure that we're sending updates to council, so you all are also aware of the way that we're communicating this out, because we do anticipate that you will likely hear about some of this work as we undergo it. So.
Yeah, and just to clarify my question, I think less concerned about the pruning and more about
The
when we are going to
removals.
be doing removals, and
Yes.
if there are removals close to each other. I would reference, I think, some of the work that you all did when we had to close down the pickleball court near the senior and community center, or when there was kind of some of the tree concerns, that having those signs up of learn more about our strategy was really great for people to understand and to know, where they could go to find more information about it. So just wanted to throw that out there. Councilmember
I appreciate
Anderson.
that input, because
Yeah.
sometimes we don't know if all of those methods are effective. And so it's helpful to know that that was effective. And I'll put that on our staff's radar as we take this project under.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Anderson?
I'm curious about, I read through the report, and then regarding tree species in general, I did not see anything specific about removal of invasive species of trees, and I was wondering if that's a significant issue on public property or private property, and if that's something that we will be looking at in the future, or what that might look like.
Yeah, so in terms of removing invasives,
Correct.
because I know that, we're doing a lot of that. That's basically the focus of our Green Redmond partnership. So I would assume that once we have all of our parks enrolled in that program, that it'll be expanded to other municipal properties. So it is a big deal for us. And so, yeah, that is the major focus with that program. So we're probably 3/4 of the way to having all of our park property enrolled in that program.
Does it typically include trees, or is it mostly like brush or shrubs?
No, it includes, small, most of the invasive trees are smaller trees like holly or something like that. So, really the bigger trees that you see around, and, with the cottonwood and the western red cedar and the Douglas fir, they're all, native species, so they're not considered invasives. Most of the invasives that we're dealing with are more shrubs, let's put it that way. Scotch broom or ground covers, English ivy, those types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fields?
Yes, thanks. So, Mr. Tuchek, I'm really glad you brought up downtown. It gives me an opportunity to go off topic a little bit. I think what my concern about downtown is significant, especially as the climate change starts to impact hotspots and some of the other things that our residents are going to, like, hey, what happened to us? Why is it 130 degrees downtown? The only thing I want to say, and I am off topic, is I think it was somewhat of a self-inflicted problem, and I hope that we are gathering lessons and learning over the past 10, 15 years so that we don't make those similar self-inflicted problems in the future. I know that I'm pontificating and venting, but couldn't help myself. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, can you talk us through the next steps on this?
Yeah. So, so next steps are going to be, well, I can go through those again, the high points of them, but basically we're going to inspect the trees that have been identified for mitigation, and we're just going to really clarify the work that needs to happen. We're going to be prioritizing the trees for the initial work. It's going to be a very large communication piece that we just talked about. And just to add, we did meet myself and Brittany Pratt and our city communications team yesterday to just start to develop the plan on this communication piece. And then we will be soliciting bids for this work. We'll be bringing the contract in front of council for approval. And then we'll perform the mitigation work, followed by tree planting as we go. So that's kind of the next steps. So this was phase 1, and that's phase 2.
Great. So do you have what you need from us tonight to be able to move forward? And I would say to council members, just overall, is everyone good with continuing in this direction, so that way they can move forward with the consulting work and getting that contract? I'm not seeing any objections here, so it sounds like we really appreciate your work. Great conversation tonight on this, and really thoughtful work, and look forward to you coming back with more details as we move into the action phase. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Great. Well, that brings us to the last item on our agenda. The last item on our agenda is council talk time. I'll just bring up a few items that I'll flag for the council, and then open it up in case others have other items for council talk time. Just wanted to note, I sent an email to the council to let you know I sent out the follow-up notes from our facilitator from our retreat with some of the action items. Myself and Council Vice President Forsyth will be meeting with the mayor and COO to go in depth on this. We had a kind of initial briefing with the mayor on some of the priorities to make sure that we have some of the support that we need to be able to move forward, make sure that the information gets transmitted, especially around budget priorities. And then we're also going to be working with working to get some of the items that are on the agenda that we identify that are kind of council items that we want to work on to show up in committee, a study session, and even using some talk time space for that. And then we also created 3 subcommittees to focus on a couple areas where we really designated some council members to work together offline, and so that we could also say those council members should talk with each other. Everyone else should wait till open session to discuss those items. And those are focusing on funding public safety, on looking at alternative crisis response and some of our program around that, and then also looking at flexible transit, bike and pedestrian options. And we, as part of the council leadership's discussions with the COO and mayor, will be talking about the next steps, but I have requested that they convene those meetings soon with those of you who are on each of those subcommittees, so you can look out for some information on those. And then I also wanted to note there's probably a couple items that are on the list that are already in process and will likely show up on committees. So I would just say committee chairs, if you can take a look at the list again as you're moving into bringing forward your committee work plans, that would be great, since we divided up those in our initial kind of work on it around the committee structure. So should give you a good idea of how you think about those, if there's anything missing that might want to be on your work plan. And as a note for those who are committee chairs, we are hoping to be able to see within the upcoming month those committee work plans come through for us all to review, so that way we can finalize those and have a rough idea of the topics that we'll be looking at in the time ahead for each of our committees. So please work with your relevant directors that you work with as you're doing your agenda setting in the time ahead. And reach out if you have any questions as you're working on those. And then just wanted to also flag that I sent out an attachment that I got from the staff of the annual community survey that EMC Research will conduct, that they've conducted for us for many years, that mostly continues the same questions, so we can keep the data over time and see how it goes, and then included a couple more questions around public safety that will help to inform some of our discussions and thinking around that, especially on some of the funding issues. And that is going to be going out in the month of March and April to the community, and then we'll likely have the survey results back in June for us to be able to review. So those are, I think, two key updates that I just wanted to share with the council. I also forgot to attach this week the upcoming business meeting agenda. So just wanted to flag that next week we will have some interviews with Planning Commission candidates. So you'll see that on the extended agenda. And so in the following business meeting that we have, we'll have some reappointments and for board and commission members, and we'll also have we'll also have the approval of a consultant agreement for stormwater and surface water system that we saw in committee, as well as we'll be, I think, setting the hearing date for the Rose Hill annexation petition as kind of the top items. And then we'll have some executive session items on potential litigation. So those are some of the main items that'll be coming up for the next business meeting. And with that, I see a couple of hands raised for council talk time. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I wanted to comment on, as a compliment for you, Ms. Kritzer, that I think the summary email that you send to the council is really helpful, and it would be great as if you read it out loud during our business meetings as sort of a community report, just so that the folks that are not watching our study sessions to hear your most recent summary verbally can hear it at our business meetings. I think that would be really helpful in terms of a sort of a committee report from the council leadership. That would be super helpful. But I wanted to say thank you, and it would be a value add.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a new thing I've been trying, and glad to hear the feedback. Thank you. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Thank you so much. I second that. Love the email. So thank you for that information. I have a few items. One is just, I'm at National League of Cities with Councilmember Forsyth, Vice President Forsyth, and we will have a lot of information to share in future meetings. Right now, it's just a lot, taking a lot in, and wanting to make sure that we have the right, topics to share out with you all. But we've been attending several sessions, and it's really great to see the opportunities that Redmond has, not just with potential funding, but also collaborations with other regional partners. So it's been great. I mentioned, we talked about this during our retreat in engaging more youth, and I had mentioned a few months ago about potentially bringing a student group from Stella Scala, which is within Redmond on the Rose Hill campus, to present on their 2050, their vision of a future city, which is in accordance with our 2050 Redmond 2050 plan. And tentatively looking at some dates in late April because they had other projects, but not this upcoming business meeting, but maybe the next business meeting in late April, they might join us. So I'll keep you posted on that. And then last thing really quickly, it's currently Ramadan. And so I'll hopefully be sharing a little bit at the next business meeting just about, why I enjoy this time of year, but also hopefully we can plan for a recess. I've been talking with Council President Kritzer about just a very brief 5-minute time where I might get to eat and break my fast. So just some updates there, but thank you.
Thank you very much, and Ramadan Mubarak. I wanted to let you know that we definitely will be able to accommodate that and let all council members as well as the public know that we'll be working with Councilor Salahuddin to identify the appropriate time to be able to take a recess to make sure that we can support his observance of the holiday. So thank you very much, and looking forward to those students coming when they're able to make the time in their very busy schedules. Great. Are there any other items for council talk time? Seeing none, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.